Grindr for Equality presents Out in the Open with You Are Loved. This conversation explores chemsex, mental health, harm reduction, community and care. The stories and experiences shared reflect those of the individuals featured and are shared in the presence of subject matter experts and support systems.
All right.
Oh, this is it. What was it?
High five.
Hey!
Oh my God, you're like on a set of friends.
Let's get into it. It's a real privilege for me to sit here with you all today. Some of you are from great organizations helping. So if we just go one by one introducing ourselves.
Hi everyone, I'm Jaron and I'm co-founder of Voda. We are a mental health app that is designed by and for the LGBT community. I started Voda because of my own experiences coming out gay and with my own struggles with mental health.
My name is Paris Lees. I'm a writer, a screenwriter, and a trans woman, and I'm looking forward to having a very honest conversation today.
Hey everyone, I'm Mark. I'm the founder of You Are Loved and a social psychologist, and we also partner in this campaign.
My name is Caden Ford. I'm a multimedia artist, and I come with the perspective of being non-binary and the underground scene, LGBT scene in London.
Hi, I'm Jake. I'm the head of communications and fundraising at Switchboard. Switchboard is the national LGBTQIA listening service. We've been running for 52 years.
So I'm Gareth, ex-professional rugby player and LGBTQ plus campaigner, but I've also run my own campaign around HIV awareness for the last 5 years, focusing on the stigma, the misunderstanding and the discrimination that comes around from a diagnosis. So I'm sat here because I've had lived experience through friends of chemsex, and I just think it's a conversation around something people are doing, but a conversation that we're not having.
I think chemsex is something that's quite difficult to talk about in the queer community because it's something that has a lot of shame and judgment attached to it, both from outside the community, but also within the community itself, which is why it's something that perhaps is not talked about as much in the media, but also is really difficult to talk about within the community itself. I think there are a lot of people who engage in chemsex, but do not think they are engaging in chemsex. Because if someone is in an afters or a chill or some kind of party, they're under influence of something, it might primarily be a social situation. But then if some people go into the bedroom and start doing it, and they both have just taken a few bums of whatever it is, I think that is considered chemsex. But a lot of people don't think that is.
I hate to be the person to say it, but it does sound like it exists on a spectrum. I guess when I think of chemsex, I'm thinking of people taking specific substances that increase arousal and kind of pleasure. I'm thinking, you know, people are taking it specifically and they're doing it in groups and at parties, and it's intentional. And I do associate it with gay men and the wider LGBTQ community. It feels like a specific sort of, I don't want to say cultural, but it just feels like a specific manifestation within that community. But I think it's very interesting, the idea that at what point does it become what we would call, you know, chems.
Can I add to that? And just build on it, because
Correct me if
no, not at all. It's not a challenge at all, Paris. In fact, it's something that I want to build on, because I think it is all of those things. But I think there's also something linked to the shame and the negative impact of that behaviour, that when it becomes, it could be chemsex and it could be okay chemsex if it's not having a negative impact on one's life or the lives of others around you connected to you. But it can very quickly become out of control. And that's the stuff that we've seen at Switchboard, where people are getting into contact because they are concerned for themselves, or they're concerned for a loved one, or they're concerned about the fear of relapse.
There isn't a clear definition of what chemsex is that is kind of agreed with everyone who does research or work in this field, but there is a kind of a general kind of agreed on definition, and that is sexualized drug use among sexual minority men primarily, but trans women as well are often included in it, and that deals with people taking one or more of the three chemsex drugs. So in a kind of concise way, that's the definition.
So why do you think it is then that it's so important for Grindr to be opening up this dialogue?
Grindr's at the forefront of LGBT. Like, you know, they've always been, from day one, they've always been there, and we've all known this thing. Also, at the moments of like not feeling alone, be like, oh, actually, there's a lot of other non-binary people I see on this app who also like are my age and also like into the same things.
It's really important for Grindr to talk about this because Grindr is a platform, and Grindr is the world's largest platform for gay, bi, queer people. But at the same time, I think queer people have always found each other. So even if Grindr would not exist tomorrow, people are going to find ways of, gay men are going to try to find each other. And a lot of them would be engaging in substance use and substance. And that's why I think it's really important. I think there's a lot of potential for impact for Grindr to signpost people to the right resources if and when they need support. And also at the same time, I think perhaps nudge people to have a more honest conversation with themselves about their own use, because I think a lot of people are in denial about perhaps whether they're addicted to substances in the first place. I think the litmus test for whether someone could have a potentially healthy relationship with chemsex is whether you're able to have sex and stay present in the experience without substances. So I think a lot of people resort to chems when they're having sex because perhaps they need to dissociate because they have so much shame attached to it that they require something else to take them out of the experience. And I think it's very common with gay and bi men because sex has been something to oppress us for so many years. It's something that was used to shame gay and bi men way back during the AIDS crisis. Even now, it's illegal for us to make love to each other in 65 countries. It's very much something that's used against us, which is why I think chems is a lot more prevalent in the queer community. And sometimes maybe it's less about what it is, but it's more about why are we doing this and why do we need this?
Yeah, so I think that's very interesting because I can quite see theoretically, you know, this imaginary person who's very happy and whole and complete and has a stable sense of self and a successful life, and you know they enjoy having sex sober, you know, and being very present, but maybe sometimes they want to change it up a little bit and have like a thrill-seeking experience. Like I can visualize that. I'm skeptical as to whether that represents the majority of people that are engaging in these behaviors. And I think it's like, what is the psychology beneath that? Because if you genuinely are having a very fulfilling life and life in general, what would be pushing you to do that regularly? Because I don't, correct me if I'm wrong, but I don't think it is just something that people are doing occasionally. Like if you're into it, you're kind of into it. And so I really struggle to think of a, you know, I'm sure that people get away with it, but it's almost like, I don't know, you know, you might get away with shoplifting, but it's like you're on thin ice. Do you know what I mean?
Do you think, right, it's just interesting, does anybody here think, and maybe it's just because of my own lived experience, are we trying our hardest here to justify something that we know is inherently something that we want to stop? Are we looking for those reasons? If so, we have to find them.
Yeah,
No.
I'm not, and I think, I mean, when it comes to the definition of chemsex and when it comes to talking about kind of lived experiences or the experiences that inform the way that we look at things, and I think as the founder of You Are Loved, how we go about You Are Loved's approach to this problem or what to do about it is a holistic approach that looks at the wider context and the root causes. But I think also what you mentioned before, kind of looking at anything on a spectrum or continuum where we understand that use or misuse can be anything from not doing this at all to being a severe drug addict, right? But most of us fall somewhere on this spectrum or continuum, and then the same with so many different behaviors, same with mental health, all for, you know, using a spectrum rather than a categorical, like it's black or white, I think is really useful. And that makes it difficult when it comes to chems or taking certain drugs in certain behaviors, because sex is far from always a big part. If you look at these chill outs or chems parties, the amount of sex that is being had, yeah, for sure, it's a part, but a lot of it is also connection in so many other ways.
I completely agree with everything you said, Mark. But this is the problem when we are trying to define something, because something you said earlier on was that chems is defined by 3 different substances, for example, named substances. However, there are many other drugs out there
Yes.
that people are taking and having sex on.
Mm.
And they're either in that safe zone that you call it,
Yeah.
and everything's fine, and they could be taking those 3 name drugs and still be in that safe zone, and they're fine. And going to Paris's point, there could be this, you know, this persona of a person that has quite a healthy life, a healthy relationship with themselves, and occasionally they dabble and they come back to their healthy life and they're fine, and they kind of toe in the water, they come back. But going back to the point I made earlier, for me, I think there is something around the definition of chemsex that when it becomes problematic, that it then has a negative impact on one's life or the life of the people around you. Those then there are issues, right? That's when we start to run into addiction, deceit, shame, isolation, and some of those things may drive the behaviour or the risk taking to start with. But we fall deeper and deeper into those spirals as we continue down that path.
But is that when you call it chemsex? Is it only called chemsex when it becomes problematic?
This is what I want, because I get it. You know, if it's not causing any bad effects, then why pathologize it, right? I mean, do we all agree if you're going out and you're taking these really hard drugs regularly and engaging in this kind of sex, that you might be okay, but like you are exponentially increasing your risk of, you know, really serious effects. So just because some people don't get them doesn't mean that the behavior itself isn't inherently risky. And then questioning the psychology underneath.
So many behaviors are risky that we take in our life. I'm not a proponent of taking, but you know, a significant number develops an addiction, and that is really important that we focus on.
Around chemsex, often called like the silent crisis or the silent killer, which means that it's something that's being done, but nobody is talking about it. Like why is that? When we've spoken about it so much, we have so much intelligence here and so much information to give. Why is it not being spoken about?
I think it's shame. And I think really it's all rooted in shame. In Matthew Todd's book, Straight Jacket, he talks about how you know, there's healthy shame when you're a child, you try and put your hand in the fire, your parent might shout at you and say, don't do that, you know, because it's the behavior that's being shamed, but you take your hand away from the fire and it's okay, mum and dad still love you, right? I think many of us, you know, you're shamed because just the way you hold your hand, you know. So it's not really the behavior, it's you, it's your natural way of being, your mannerisms. I certainly experienced that. And so you learn that you should be ashamed of being you, like what you are is the shameful thing. And that's incredibly painful because you can stop doing something that's not good, but you can't stop being who you are. And so I think so many of us just grow up with this shame and stigma, and then as we grow up we want to reject that and say I'm proud, and so we sort of reject all shame. And I really feel that that's where a lot of problems come from, because actually some things we should be ashamed of, some behaviors are not good. I don't believe in I don't believe everything that we do or say is completely neutral, you know. And I think that maybe we're throwing the baby out with the bathwater in rejecting sort of the toxic shame that we grew up with. Is that a bit controversial?
No, I completely agree.
I think in order to talk about like being the silent killer, we have to talk about the bigger thing, which is mental health. So we can't completely ignore mental health and then expect people to bring attention to this, because they're linked together. They're the same thing. They're brothers and sisters. And yeah, so there's just the obvious is like we just don't want to talk about mental health. And that's why people go into drugs and stuff, because they feel isolated and they feel lonely and they want to go somewhere to escape.
Both of you made really valid points. And the thing, growing up with toxic shame, that doesn't get turned off. Suddenly you come out and you're suddenly given a pride flag and everything's great. Yay, we're waving a pride flag. Where does that toxic shame go? We hide it. We carry it. It's still carried around with us like baggage. But what we do is we find community. We try to find a sense of belonging. And sometimes that sense of belonging, that sense of community is found with similar people who are carrying around that toxic shame. And some of us find release in taking substances.
As in a coping mechanism.
Yeah.
Yes, absolutely.
Or projecting these things onto other people around us. It was like, why do I have to sort out my own if I can just blame you for what you do? Because it's easier that way.
Yeah.
Life is always easier if you've got someone else to blame.
Yeah.
I want to talk about a point that Jake was mentioning, because I think there is this double layer of shame when it comes to chemsex. So I think when someone has mental health issues and they're struggling with substances, it's really so hard for them to seek support. And so for queer people, when that substance use is linked with sex, that becomes doubly hard. There's like 2 layers of shame. And that's why I think it's such a silent killer, because it's so hard to talk about it with anyone. It's hard to talk about it within the community itself because there's so much shame and judgment within the community. But it's also difficult to talk about outside of the community because mainstream media historically sex has been something they use to oppress and stigmatize against queer men. And so I think that's why when these 2 factors come in together, it's really hard for people to seek support.
It's not rocket science, you know, if you've grown up being bullied and you have family rejection. And so of course that's going to feed into your relationship with, you know, sex.
Do you think that's magnified now because of the times we live in now as to the times we used to live in? As like, for example, social media.
I would say no.
No?
I would say no. If you look back through the history of Switchboard's logbooks, we're going back 52 years. There have been conversations about this issue for as long as Switchboard has been operating.
Really? So what's interesting there, I think we've gone from 2 different perspectives. Where we started, that chemsex wasn't spoken about. And now, as we just said, it's spoken about, but in the wrong way or glamorized in some way. So does that make it kind of a generational thing that the younger generation now, with the social media, with music, it's more accepted and more glamorized? Or when we didn't speak about it, maybe to the older generation?
Yeah, I think culture has evolved, and I think different generations view things differently. So I think in the past, we might have viewed something as chemsex, and along the way, that has evolved into chill out culture. And I think increasingly for like a Gen Z population, it has now evolved in a way into afters culture. And I think the modulating factor between all of these is actually perhaps community. I think maybe when people think of chemsex, they don't think of much of a social element to things. It's just mostly focused on a few substances and sex. And then now when I think about contemporary afters culture, it perhaps there's a lot more of a social element. There is substances involved, but I don't think perhaps substances and sex is the main thing. But I think some people within afters culture or within spaces where you're just doing private parties in someone's house, they might be engaging in chemsex because they are intoxicated on a substance and they're doing it in the bedroom.
But do we know how it breaks down? Because young people are taking less drugs and being less promiscuous in general, right? So how is that playing out in the LGBTQ community?
Well,
do we know?
I know from Switchboard's own conversation data that 20% of our conversations are around mental health, and within that theme there's a subset around isolation, and the proportional percentage of people talking about isolation goes up the older they become. And there's also a statistic from Controlling Chemsex that says that it is older men who are having sex with men who are either engaging with chemsex or relapsing after some kind of trauma, maybe the loss of a partner or the breakup of a long-term relationship.
That's interesting.
So for me, there is a distinct correlation between what we're seeing in our own conversation data at Switchboard around the themes of isolation and older people experiencing isolation, and what Controlling Chemsex is seeing as well. So, and it goes to your point as well that, you know, there are trends of younger people kind of moving away from drugs as well.
But I think it's a combination of both generational differences and kind of a life course trends as well. So as we become older, our priorities and what we like to do with our time changes as well. And when we look at, so indeed, chemsex or drug use, misuse is particularly prevalent amongst men that are sexual minority men, which is primarily what we talk about when we talk about chemsex, between 35 and 50. It doesn't mean that younger people and older people are not taking part. For sure they are. It's just like there is a higher concentration there. But I think to a certain extent it has to do with their life course as well. So when people get into their 40s, my age, their midlife crisis, we might change our priorities. We might change how we like to socialize. So when we were younger, we might like to go out to clubs and socialize in those kind of environments, but at some point we might feel like that's not really my environment anymore. And the danger here, sadly, that time, the midlife period, 40s, 50s, is when most people die from suicide and drugs, if they haven't died in their teenage years. So the teenage years are high, and then it's the midlife. And that has to do with something around reevaluating your life, looking at what am I doing, how am I living, how should I continue living my life. And then if you engage in chemsex environments at that age, your body is also older and perhaps is not as able to take the same amount of drugs or staying up for as many nights in a row without sleep as you could when you were younger.
Early millennial and Gen Xers, I'm a Gen Xer, we grew up not expecting to
Even
get
be
to
here.
exactly that.
Yeah.
We grew up through HIV/AIDS, so for a lot of us, we were already living with the shame of being queer. Then we grew up in a society that told us that we were going to die, and actually it was fine for us to die. And then when you get to kind of like your 40s and 50s, you are then dealing with aging parents. Your parents may die. You become the older generation. You may then go through a relationship that fails, and that could be a long-term relationship. And so all of the things that you said, Mark, plus all of this other stuff as well, leads to perhaps relapses or a sense of isolation and wanting to connect as well. So I think the issue around older generations is multifaceted, and it's not one particular thing that we can point at, but we are living with generational trauma ourselves, and we carry that forward. And if we've not been able to do the work, when we get to the point of like 40s or 50s and we've ladled on all of these other pressures, societal and cultural pressures on ourselves, then of course, if you're feeling that, if you're feeling that low, where might you turn? And if it's so easily available to you.
So Switchboard has been supporting the LGBT plus community since 1974, a long time. How have those conversations and the need for help over those past 50 odd years, how have they changed?
I would say that when Switchboard first came into existence, the conversations were very much about finding community, finding safe spaces. In a lot of ways, Gareth, the types of conversations haven't changed at all. The underlying need for safe space and community has always been there. It's just the subject matters that change depending on what's happening culturally within this country at any one time.
Grindr and You Are Loved did a survey, and there's a lot of emotional drivers that they spoke about. Connection, anxiety, escape, loneliness. Let's kind of unpack them and talk about like experiences around them and why I suppose them trigger words would lead to what we're talking about.
Yeah, I think loneliness is a big driver when it comes to chemsex. I think for a lot of gay and bi men who are socially isolated, actually spaces where they have chemsex might be the only or one of the few spaces where they meet other queer people. And so, and I think that's why it's one of the big drivers of chemsex. I think there's a persistent feeling of loneliness as well that could drive people to seek such spaces and to seek the company of other men. And I think that's when it can become a really slippery slope, because if there's the only way you can cope with feelings of loneliness is through meeting other men in spaces like that, then it's very easy to fall into a very dysfunctional relationship with substances. And
So for me, as like being trans, the government is telling me I'm not worthy and like I don't exist. My parents are telling me I'm not worthy, I don't exist. People on the street are telling me I'm not worthy and don't exist. And then I'm in the bedroom on substances with this one person who's validating me. Like, why wouldn't I just constantly go down that route? Because obviously if I'm trying to feel accepted, I'm trying to feel loved, and I'm trying to feel appreciated, it happens in this one space. So this is why we have to look at it at a bigger picture. It's like, well, let's reverse the clock a little bit back. Why is that happening? Where's the loneliness coming from? And where's all of this coming from? And why are you seeking that? And why is this? And in that moment of euphoria, being on these substances and having, because obviously having sex with someone, it's like this energy exchange that's very, very powerful. It's one of the most powerful like drugs I think there is like energy sex. And when this is happening on substances, it's obviously, it's hard to ever match that feeling again. And this is why you chase that, is that feeling of euphoria. And yeah.
So as you are loved then, or the switchboard, what would you say to somebody who said, well, why wouldn't I? Or why wouldn't I?
Switchboard would never say to somebody, or Switchboard would never judge in a conversation. We are there to, first and foremost, provide a safe listening service, a non-judgmental space. But if somebody, some of our conversations are people who are coming to us because they're scared that they may fall into patterns of negative behaviour. And so there we are then able to signpost them to other organisations who can support them. We are there to listen. And sometimes people often have the answers themselves and they are contacting us because they just need to work through those answers. So it's not about what we as an organisation would say to somebody, it's about providing a safe, non-judgmental space in the first place. But I think those themes of isolation, they come up time and time again, that feeling of wanting to find connection.
Would you say shame is a big trigger as well?
A big, I would say, rather, I would say we're looking at the survey and the emotions or words that people associated with chemsex, and the ones that you were saying, connection, loneliness, escape and anxiety, I think were the top 4. I'd say, I think it was also the primary one, or the ones that most survey respondents mentioned, is connection. Connection, essentially, kind of the opposite of loneliness, right? And I think connection is what is at the root of everything, and essentially goes back to why I call our organization You Are Loved, because feeling loved or being loved is also connection, I would argue. So at the bottom, if we strip away, as you were saying, Kaden, if we strip away all of it, at the bottom of it all, or at the core of it all, is a want of connection, right? Connecting with other people, feeling loved by other people. So fighting the opposite of loneliness and isolation, and I think escape from a world where you maybe don't feel connected or loved, goes back to connection.
I'm also going to throw in, you know, I'm going to say it, lack of boundaries. I think that for many of us, our first sexual experiences were conducted in shame. You know, you know, it may have been in a public toilet. You know, it may have been in a space that felt secretive, and so when that's your entry point into sexuality and intimacy, and you grow up with the shame, and you naturally want to reject that. You think, well, all shame is bad, all boundaries are bad. We don't have to live by the rules of heteronormative society. We can just do whatever we want, which is great, but there's a trade-off with that, you know? And I think that is why we're more likely to die from, you know, engaging in these behaviors than our straight friends.
But that argument, which I agree with, kind of goes back to connection again, right?
Yeah.
Because we didn't have the chance or the opportunities in the same way to connect with, you know, whoever we were falling in love with or having a crush on before we came out or came to terms with our sexuality or gender identity. So again, a lack of connection growing up, coming of age, has made us kind of crave that connection, and perhaps therefore engage in. Queer people take more drugs in general than the general population. Maybe that is one of the drivers. I would argue that it's more complex. I would argue that neurodivergency might come into play as well.
That comes up in our
thrill-seeking.
conversation.
Yeah.
If somebody is talking about it but isn't ready to stop, like, what do you say to people? When is that point? When you ready?
I mean, I can say from personal and professional experience, if someone is not ready to stop, it's very difficult to make I would argue you cannot make someone do anything. So I would say that the thing that you can do, and I've done with friends in the last 20 years, is to make sure that they know that you are there no matter what, and that you support them, and that you are willing to listen and to hold space for them, but to kind of convince someone to stop a behavior if they're going down, I think is very difficult. All you can do is be there, and when they're ready for
I have
you.
friends who go in and out of rehab it's not until they're ready to stop that they're actually gonna stop. You know, going to rehab, doing these things, it doesn't really work unless you truly want to do it for yourself and you're ready to put the time and effort into the situation.
I think it's only possible for someone to stop if they can be radically honest with themselves as to what you're running away from. I think oftentimes when people turn to substances, there is perhaps an emotion or something that they are not able to face. And so substances change the way they relate with the world, and so bring them out of their present experience. So I think for a lot of people, in order to stop, they first need perhaps a therapist or a friend to actually help them untangle or bear witness to the pain that they're trying to run away from. You can only stop running away from the pain when you recognize the pain is there.
Yeah, you can get through to people sometimes though, because I wasn't an alcoholic or any specific thing, but I would describe myself as an addict in the sense that I've had a really unhealthy relationship with lots of things over the years. You know, anything that gives you a sort of high, you know, whether that's risky sexual encounters in terms of putting myself in situations where, you know, I'm in danger, whether it's shoplifting or, you know, I always shifted it around so it didn't manifest in too much of one thing. But my friend Matthew Todd, who wrote Straitjacket, actually, and I was really in denial and very much so, oh, this is respectability politics. And I didn't want to hear it. And he really sort of said, you know, you should really come along to the 12-step meetings. And so I did that about 7 years ago, and I would consider myself to be in recovery. And I managed to get another friend into recovery, actually, who was an alcoholic. Obviously, you've got to have something to work with there. If somebody's really deep in denial, it's really, really, really tricky, particularly if it's somebody that you love. But, you know, sometimes you can get through to people. And I think most people, if they're being honest, they know when their life isn't functioning. So the 12-step groups, you know, were really helpful for me. So I would definitely point people towards those if they were suffering from addiction.
So somebody's not ready to stop. What is this, apart from just saying you'll be there, is that the support? Is that it? It's like, I'm just here for you.
Yeah, completely.
Yeah.
It's about providing, and this is part of the reason why I'm here, right? It's about providing a safe, non-judgmental space. Just being heard can sometimes be enough for somebody to hold their own mirror up to themselves, to recognize that they might be in a spiral of negative behavior, or that they might have an impact, their behavior may have an impact on the people around them. So being able to hold that space for somebody, a safe environment that's non-judgmental, non-directive, and something that we've been doing for 52 years, is the first step in supporting somebody who may recognize that they may have a problem, but they're not ready to take that first step, as Paris talked about.
But in your personal life, do you ever think it's, like, professionally, I think that's the right approach. Do you ever think it's appropriate to say, listen, this is out of control? You know, like,
But it might
you're a
help.
mess.
You can say that. You can say that to anyone. You can say it over and over again.
You don't think it's ever effective?
Maybe in some case, if they are ready to hear it.
Yeah.
But then that means that they are ready to hear it. So they are ready for, I mean, these are semantics, I guess.
Because sometimes I think the shock of somebody actually calling it out, I think it can...
It's not for you, I think, to decide or to tell someone how they should or should not live their life. So if you, by all means, you can say that this is your view when you're worried about your friend, but you're not going along with it. If your friend, someone you love, is having an addiction problem, I wouldn't say that you being there for them, knowing that so that they know that they can rely on you for it. It's not going along with it. I think it's.
So what about then? What about when you say it's not for you to judge whether someone does or doesn't? When if that person is in the spiral, actually, I would feel as a friend, actually, this is my position. Like this is my help. Is that I'm telling you.
If you don't have the emotional capacity to help that person, that's 100% okay. And you can go to that friend's friend and be like, listen, I don't have the emotional capacity to help them right now. Do you mind stepping in? Because I don't want to put them in a worse position by putting them down or doing this other things. But I also wanted to discuss, I've been working on this project, if anybody wants to fund it. Looking at rehab completely wrong. We take one person out of these social situations and put them into this thing, doing it by themselves. We need to be sending entire friend groups away to villas with
Yeah.
doctors and professionals, teach them how to be sober together, teach them how to have these conversations together, because then you can integrate this whole group back into society together as a collective. Because if we are talking about connection,
Great idea.
we can't do this alone. It isn't an alone thing.
So what role does education and early prevention play?
Your love's approach to this, of course, you need crisis support. So, of course, you need support someone that is in an addictive state and in a desperate state. And I do think there is an exception to what I just said before. I think if someone is a danger to themselves or to others, obviously around them, then you might have to step in. But then the option is for you to try to get them sectioned, and that is quite a dramatic thing. I've tried with a couple of people in my past, and it's failed both times. But by all means, if they're a danger to themselves, I think you should do that. So that's one point.
Yeah.
But I think in terms of support, talking about support, and that's also a frustration I've found both in my professional and personal life, is that we often talk about crisis support. So when someone has developed an addiction or someone needs some mental health support, and what would be the most effective of all, I'd argue, is to go all the way back, and it goes back to what you said, Caitlin, before, is to do more prevention and consider that support. So educate, teach people about how to look after their mental health, if they want to use them in a harm reduction relevant way, and prevent them from developing those problems in the first place. So if we could do much more,
So being
much
proactive
earlier.
instead of reactive.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And we often
Yeah.
just talks about, oh, we need more mental health support, we need more crisis support and more addiction support. Yes, of course, we need to help those people over there. But if we could try to prevent less people from going to that place in the first place,
Yeah.
in the long run.
I'd agree with that, but I also agree with your well, I don't know if it was a point or a question. You saying, are we sort of complicit in it? I mean, the fact is, I wouldn't have gone into recovery if it hadn't have been for my friend Matthew Todd saying, hang on a minute, what's underneath these behaviours, and actually kind of like forcing me to see that some of the things that I was doing were not healthy, actually. And so I'm really grateful, because that's one of the best things I've ever done. And if he'd had a very sort of non-judgmental, oh, it's fine, you do whatever you want.
That's not what I'm arguing.
No.
Yeah, I think we are saying the same thing,
Yeah.
but in different ways.
Different ways.
I am saying, being there, saying, I can see that you are destructive in what you're doing. It's not
Yeah,
helping.
yeah.
I am here, but
But
my
not in a
point is,
shameful way.
my point is, yeah, we can't force someone to do something,
Yeah.
and you shouldn't shame them into it. But I'm not
Yeah.
saying that you should just be there holding space and buying them drugs. for sure.
Right, right.
So I think the
Yeah.
approach that Matthew Todd did with you is the right one, and I'm advocating for the same thing.
If we talk about prevention, we need to go even one step more back. Is we need to stop traumatizing generations of queer people. I feel like what society does is you traumatize queer people, and then you judge them for the way they cope with that trauma. And sometimes because there's so much sexual shame, then that's where substances come in. I think the earliest prevention actually is we need to change hate speech on. We need to make it so that it's safe for trans and non-binary people to just exist in the public domain. We need to fight against this like rising like anti-LGBTQ plus backlash. We need to fight against the rollbacks in DEI. We need to fight against why is it so politicized to just even introduce somebody by their own pronouns. I think these are all like so interlinked.
Yeah.
I agree with that, but how does that answer the question of why we're seeing this particular type of sex and drugs in the older generation?
Well, I think that does tie back to kind of the life course and what people are doing at different points in their life and how they are connecting with each other at different points of their lives. And I think when chemsex, which often the term is often associated with a problematic, extreme behavior, and I think with older generations, or I mean, my generation, so it's not that old, but I think that generation is connecting in a different way. They don't go out to clubs or bars that much anymore. They connect more at home, in kind of homely environments, and therefore they are more associated with the chemsex phenomenon and such.
Because I thought that was really interesting that you said that earlier, actually, because, I know that lots of LGBTQ people do have families now, but when you were saying about how, when you're in your 20s, you might be going to the club, and then maybe as you get a bit older, you sort of grow out of the club and you think, okay, we'll move over to, having parties at home and stuff. And in my head, I'm thinking, wow, like most of my straight friends are like, they're having kids. Do you know what I mean? And they're in bed by like half 9. So I wonder if the fact that we don't naturally progress to having children as often as,
For sure.
straight people do.
For sure, for sure.
know.
And I think it goes back into like life purpose. What is my life about? And for
Right.
straight people, they are following a set path of heteronormativity and having children, having a family.
Yeah.
We don't. So when we hit perhaps the midlife crisis, this older generation that I'm currently in, we look at our lives and we think, is this it? Am I going to continue doing this? I can't go to the clubs or bars anymore because I feel like I'm too old for that. But what am I supposed to do? I don't have kids, so I don't. So then perhaps you revert to that. That's not the full picture, but yeah, it's a part of
It's a
the picture
factor.
for sure.
For sure.
So Paris, I'm pretty certain that all of us will agree that What It Feels Like for a Girl was a pretty amazing TV show. It's a really powerful, strong adaptation of your life. How important was it for it to be as authentic as possible?
I mean, really, it was the, and thank you, it was the guiding principle, really. I wanted to entertain people, wanted them to enjoy watching it, but really, I just wanted to tell the truth. You know, I wanted to tell the truth about my experiences. You know, some of them were very negative, and I think we often have this overarching kind of like cultural narrative of, you know, we're rejected by our families, and then we find our chosen community and our chosen family, and it's all rainbows and you know, good vibes from there on out. But actually, a lot of the hostility and a lot of the toxic things that I was introduced to actually came from that community at that time. And I just, you know, I don't want to, you know, produce anything that's making LGBTQ people look bad. But then I also, it's not a PR campaign. I just want to tell the truth. And really, it's why I'm pleased to be having this conversation today, because it's like, this stuff is happening. We know it's happening. Let's just be honest about it and actually dig in and explore, well, why was I doing that? Why was I doing some of the things that I was doing then? Why was I drawn to those experiences? And, you know, some of my friends who had more stable attachments, for example, and felt that love of their families a bit more closely, they weren't engaging in those kind of behaviours. And so I did really want to explore that, because I think at the time I couldn't have articulated that. And it was like, I just did these crazy things and I couldn't actually tell you why. And it's taken me, you know, many years to kind of get some perspective on what was causing me to act out in that way.
We're all part of the community here. We're all focusing on the welfare of the community. But why is this subject, why is it also important to be outside the LGBT community? Because we all talk about allyship and the need for allyship to create better environments for us to be able to be authentic to ourselves and to be okay without walking down the street without being discriminated. So why is it so important that outside of this group, the allies who can make life better for us as well are not kind of involved in this conversation? Why is it important that they also have a part to play?
I think it's really important for us to talk about it, because, and the wider community to talk about it, because the fact that it is so difficult to talk about is precisely why we need to talk about it. I think the reason why there's so many excess deaths, I think why so many people are struggling with grief is because we have never really addressed this as a community. And it's also something that's very uncomfortable for people who are not queer to talk about. And so if we can't talk about this problem, we cannot change this problem.
And two other points that goes back to, we said before that, okay, the community can be quite toxic and we can treat each other badly, but at the end of the day, as almost every person has said here, it does stem from the general population at the very beginning. So they are somewhat to blame for a part of why the state of the queer community is the way it is. So that's one aspect. The second aspect is also quite obvious, I guess, because we all have families, right? I have a straight mum and dad and sister and brother, so they are affected by these issues. And I think that's also a problem, that when people die in the worst possible outcome, often the family members don't understand what happened, and there is this kind of disconnect between the life and the queer life that their son or child or daughter lived, and their understanding of their child. So I think it's really important that they are being pulled into this conversation, understand what we are going through and how we are living and why we are doing it.
Well, we've come to the end. I know that it's been an amazing conversation to facilitate, to be a part of, to see things from completely different lens. Like I genuinely thought, and I'm sure a lot of people here thought that they had an idea of other people's experiences, but I think people have just spoken on behalf of communities, on behalf of organizations in such an amazing way that's given me a completely different insight. And hopefully people who are listening to this have not only been educated, but I feel have found the ability to see signs, to know where to guide people, to know how to start up conversations in a room of just not two people, maybe more people, have more conversations, more diverse conversations. So it's been a real honor to sit here. It's been a real honor to be a part of this group. And on behalf of everybody who listens to this, I say from them a huge, huge thank you for you. What personal stuff you've allowed to be put out into the public domain.
If you're in the United Kingdom and have been affected by any of the issues discussed in this programme, support and resources are available at youareloved.org.uk. You can also reach Switchboard, the LGBTQ+ helpline. They're available every day from 10 a.m. to 10 p.m. by phone at 0800 01 19 100, by email at hello@switchboard.lgbt, or via live chat on their website, switchboard.lgbt. You can also find more information and local community resources in the Grindr app by visiting the Safety and Privacy Centre located in the sidebar.